Hey everybody, today I am reviewing LA Confidential. This film came out in 1997 and it was directed by Curtis Hanson. This film was probably a crowning achievement, you could say, for Curtis Hanson, where everything just kind of came together for him and he was taken far more seriously as a director after that point. Because LA Confidential is one of those movies that at least for me, like no matter what, if it's on TV at any point, I feel like I've got to watch it. It's just it's so damn entertaining. It's slick, it's pulpy, it has all of the makings to be a classic, which is really the point. But yet it does a lot of things as well to keep things very fresh and modern and keep it a part of the neo-noir genre. I do have a bit of a weakness for film noir and neo-noir when it's well done, because, you know, those are obviously inspired by the noir films of the crime suspense noir films of the 1940s as well as the early 50s. They have a darkness and a sophistication about them that you just don't see in other films, and even though they often have very convoluted plotting, the themes themselves and the characters are what resonate. They are the core, and that's what never loses its consistency, in the good ones at least. And I think that LA Confidential is very mature in that regard, and it's very much honoring the tradition of old school Hollywood filmmaking. Honoring those films without drawing too much attention to that fact. But these are those same films that have those grand allegorical tales that are meant to be like a commentary on social constructs, on social behaviors like greed, duplicity, all of those things that we often see as themes in American movies. And maybe that's why I think that LA Confidential in particular is a movie that's always kind of fun to return to, because it knows that that's what's important. It's what's underneath. It's not so much the style and the aesthetic. It has a timeless quality to it, and really when you watch it today, it doesn't feel dated. And I like that it's more stripped down. It's not hyper stylized. It has kind of a grit to it and a minimalism that makes it feel much more real. And that allows us to really focus on what's important, because there's a lot going on in this movie. This film is, of course, about the seedy underbelly of Los Angeles in the early 1950s. It's all about crime and the duplicity within the police department itself, the tabloid media, and the romanticism of all of that set against the backdrop of Hollywood. These are all things we've seen before, but again, I do think of the neo-noir films that came out in the 90s, I think in terms of mainstream neo-noir, this one does it some of the best. A lot of it has to do with the central characters. There are three main characters in this movie and how they represent, you know, different fragments of the social system and all of the kind of shadiness that goes on. No one's really completely good or completely bad, and each person has their own agenda. You have Guy Pearce, who's maybe at the center of the film, and he plays Ed Exley. I think Guy Pearce is a wonderful actor, very underrated. He's this young big shot in the police department, and he says he does what he does because he likes helping people and because he wants to fight for justice. And I think that, you know, there's certainly merit to that for sure, but that's definitely not all of it, and you see that as it goes on. There's more to it, and there are usually selfish reasons for everything beneath it all, and for him, he's trying to sort of avenge his father in a way, follow in his father's footsteps, even though his father was killed in the line of duty. But he's kind of a shark. He's willing to do anything to climb that corporate ladder. He might be one of my favorite characters, and a lot of it just has to do with the way that Pearce plays him, just because you always sense that there's something more to what he's thinking than what he's saying, and that is kind of exciting. You know he's hiding a lot, and it's fun to see him slowly change as the movie goes on into somebody that you may not have expected. And same with a lot of the characters in the movie. I think that they are surprised by his actions as well. So you have Bud White, played by a young Russell Crowe, and I honestly think this might be one of his better performances, really. He's this brutish, very violent police officer who has major anger management problem, but he has a thing for saving women from abusers of all sorts. And part of it is because of his past, which we learn a little bit more later on in the film. But he also has some misguided anger, I think, towards women as well. And that's also evident. He's far more sensitive in terms of the three men in the movie. He's the most sensitive, the most insecure, the most easily hurt. And that usually tends to happen when you're somebody that's all physicality, and that's how you want to be perceived. It's usually a major defense mechanism. Then you have Jack Vincennes, who is played by Kevin Spacey, and he is kind of the poster boy for the police force, and he's got his hands in everything. He has his hands, of course, in the police force itself, as well as Hollywood and in the tabloid media. He has that made man glint in his eye, and I know that Spacey himself patterned the character somewhat after Dean Martin, and I think that's very evident when you watch him. He's very charismatic. He's not a young hotshot or a hothead like the other two characters, but within this whole murder that happens in the movie that takes up the focus of the movie, he starts to feel guilt for a lot of his actions, and that's where his redemption comes in. And within the story, naturally, it's meant to be a portrait of American life, or American values, or lack thereof. And you see what happens when you start to shine a light on a lot of the topics that people don't want to talk about, especially in the 1950s. And so here, a lot of that has to do with racism and minorities. Not only is this a snapshot of American life, but it's a snapshot of all of the things that happened that maybe didn't get the focus, like what I said is focusing on minorities, and they are often accused of crimes that they didn't commit precisely because they're minorities. Yes, in this particular story, we're seeing those American values in the sense that the world and America is run by white, patriarchal men, and they can do whatever they want regardless of whether it's moral or not. There is an image that stuck out in my mind as a really powerful one, a striking one, and it's when during the interrogation, so when one of the African-American characters is brought in for questioning, and he's wrongly accused of the murders at the Night Owl case. He's in this little room and he's got that mirror window, but you can see the reflections of all of the men kind of projected onto him while he's sitting back there, and they look so big and dominant, and he looks so small. But that to me just encapsulates everything that needed to be said about it, and it's very simple, but as I said, very striking. But there's a key point when the girl who was raped wrongly accused the African-American characters of the Night Owl murders, and she knew that they didn't do it, but she of course realizes that no one would care about a Mexican girl getting raped at that time. So she wrongly accused them to have justice for herself. And it's one of those things where you're just like, wow, lying just so you can fight for yourself in that way is just, it's a really kind of dark and depressing idea, but absolutely honest. And of course, the true culprits not only lie within the department, but they are at the hands of the authority figures themselves, ironically. And the way that is handled, I think, is really, really awesome. The Kevin Spacey murder is, to me, one of those moments where I just didn't see it coming, and I never forgot it. There's almost no buildup at all, and it's one of those things you got to go back and watch it and be like, wait, did I miss some sort of cue? Because you might be like dozing off or whatever, thinking this is just going to be just another scene, and all of a sudden he just shoots him and you're like, whoa. To me, having it shock like that is much more realistic and therefore more effective. The film overall does a lot of things like that I think are very respectable. That's the word that I like to use when thinking about this movie. Yes, it's very respectable. It's well made, and it translates pretty much into any period. And the combination of law and politics and tabloid media and Hollywood is still quite a prominent thing, maybe now more than ever. At least the combination of those things all working together, and that's part of why it does feel timeless. And I also really like how clean the movie is, how focused, and even though the plot is very convoluted, as I've said, and a lot of movies of this nature are, the scenes themselves are quite focused. The actors are very focused, and the design, the mise-en-scene doesn't really draw too much attention to itself. Yeah, it's the 1950s, but it's not some sort of exaggerated version of the 1950s. It's a realistic portrayal of the 50s, what they really must have been like. The noir aspects of the film, of course, are very much intact, but they are handled with a subtlety that I guess I wasn't expecting. And that I just really appreciate. We see a lot of movies that are callbacks, meant to glorify nostalgia, and I don't think that this one does. It is much more about the humanity, and that is why I personally respond to it. It's not the deepest film of the world, and I do think that a lot of what is thematic, what is like the hidden meanings and things like that, are not really that hidden. A lot of it is on the surface. There's not too much to really pick apart here, but that's okay. This movie is not The Big Sleep, nowhere near something as brilliant as that, nor is it as brilliant as something like Chinatown. But it does remind me of those films in the best ways. It does lack those levels of complexity, but I mean, that's a hard act to follow anyway. But don't let that detract you if you haven't seen this movie. It's one of those movies, I can't imagine somebody not liking it. I think there's something for everyone to admire, and it's just, as I said, good popcorn entertainment. If you haven't seen it before, check it out. And that's my review. Thank you all for listening. All my social media information is below. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe, but only if you want to. Catch you next time.